Amigos, amigas, bienvenidos al último evento de este primer día de la Semana de la Seguridad Telefónica. I'm Will Phil Kempik y esta charla va a ser en inglés. So I'm going to read his bio. Phil Kempik leads the security sales operations at Securelogix with over 36 years of experience working in telecommunications industry. Phil has spent the last 10 years helping companies design and implement successful voice security strategies. Phil has excelled in sales role at IBM, Cisco, Siemens, and Securelogix. He is a native Californian and resides in Orange County, where he enjoys beach life. Thank you so much for being here, Phil.
Thank you, Elena. Thanks for having me.
Let's see the videos of the presentation, and I'll get back to you.
Okay, great.
La Semana de la Seguridad Telefónica, presentada por Aslo Information Technologies, 19 y 20 de octubre 2021.
The public switch telephone network as we know it is almost in danger because so few people have confidence in it anymore. A lot of people don't answer the phone at all anymore if they don't know exactly who it is, and that's a serious thing. Companies with large contact centers are very concerned about it because people won't take their calls anymore. So I think restoring all of this trust is important both for consumers and businesses, and Securelogix is doing a lot to try to restore that trust.
Our customer base runs the gamut from some of the largest financial institutions on the planet, from some of the largest military and defense organizations, right down to a single law firm that is dealing with a robocall issue at a kind of a small business level. We have customers across that base.
We are a smallish, dedicated team who are very focused on our customer and very eager to help them solve their problems. We're not a big, nameless, faceless shop. We're a dedicated group of people who work very hard together and really provide, I think, almost custom services and products and solutions to our customers.
One of our key capabilities is through a managed service. So we have a managed security services for voice, or MSSV. And the idea there is we captured this 20 years of expertise into a managed service team. So we deploy our solution, we provide our solution in whatever form the customer needs, whether it's a mid-sized bank up to a big bank, military, etc. And then our team runs the solution for the customers.
We've been doing voice security for 20 years. No one else in the industry has done that. We were doing it long before there was a lot of voice over IP in the marketplace, and we understood the problem, we addressed it in a TDM world, and then when we transitioned it to the SIP world, we're able to identify what's happening out in the industry because we do have our solution deployed in some of the biggest networks across the world, both government and commercial, and we're seeing in real time these issues, and then we can develop countermeasures and get those implemented.
And that we have continued to evolve now into what I consider the full spectrum of threats associated with the voice service as a whole, which now includes this, what I see as kind of a final big piece associated with call verification and authentication. At the end of the day, you cannot separate voice security from authentication. It is a spectrum of activity that needs to be addressed as a unified whole with a solution set that what we provide, we think, is truly unique in the market.
We have seen that this is a very experienced team at Securelogix, and we are very pleased to have Phil. Phil, can you tell us a little bit how you faced the pandemic demand on the retail sector? Probably some of them were prepared for this increase of the demand, and how all the digital services change and still remain an option for the people can stay at home and receive their goods and the products safely. How you guys at Securelogix face this challenge?
Yes, thank you, Alina, and good afternoon, everyone. So the pandemic created a number of challenges for our customers and prospects. One, you mentioned the work at home environment. How do you secure calls there? How do you get calls routed successfully there and not interfere with the normal business activities and have somebody to take advantage of that? The weak security environment that may exist in a home connection with robocalls, spam, or fraud. The other thing you'll see in my presentation is the retail industry took a huge hit in terms of the sheer volume of increased threatening and harassing calls. Some double, triple the amount. So customers that had our solution, we were able to tune that system, block those additional attacks, and help them through the pandemic and not get distracted with limited resources they had in terms of call center agents, and block those calls and not disrupt their operations. So we did provide some critical functions to a number of large big box retailers, and really showed in terms of our activity and production to help them through that process.
So are you changing some strategies in order to live in this world where I mean, we are living in the new normal now, but
Sure.
are you changing some strategies to live without? And we even expect, or at least in Europe, are expecting that the conditions probably in health would change again, and we're going back again to some restrictions. What are you guys are thinking for the last months of the year?
Yes. So obviously, we get into the holiday retail space. That's the big revenue generation for all retail environments. So we're trying to be proactive and help them with these additional signature files to help block additional robocalls. We're stepping up our validation and checking of numbers that we receive. We get numbers from various sources. A lot of it is from our existing managed service customers. So we see an attack at one customer, we'll vet those numbers out, validate them, and then load them in the profiles, the signature profiles of our other retail customers, so they can be protected and not have to go through a large TDOS or harassing call attack. So the other thing we're trying to work proactively now is with the shipping crisis that's going to affect us for the next year or so in the logistics process. Obviously, calls into retail logistic operations shipping organizations are critical. So we're making sure we've got the right systems in place, signature files to protect them from any type of phone attack that may disrupt their ability to help resolve getting shipments from the ports and off the ships to their retail stores.
Especially when the supply chain is also the target of some attacks. I mean, especially when we are talking about some medical equipment or even the vaccines.
Yes, very, very, very important critical items. Obviously, some of the vaccines to be stored very precisely in certain temperatures. So any delay in those shipments could be detrimental to the value of that shipment and impact patients and families all through the country.
Great, Phil. So let's see your presentation, your keynote, and we'll be here receiving the questions. And as soon as we receive it, we're going to tell you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Elena. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Phil Kempik, Vice President of Sales Operations for Securelogix, partnering with ASLO to bring security solutions to the Latin American market. So we're all about call security and trust. You heard that in the video from our executives, but we really want to bring the faith and excitement, enthusiasm back into the simple process of answering a phone call. You know, in the States here, robocalls are just tremendously, we saw Jim Dalton talk about that with TransNexus, just the sheer volume of robocalls that are impacting customers. And you'll see in our use case examples of how detrimental it can be. So we want to restore that trust so people can answer the call and you can feel confident that it's progressing your business, friendships, or personal calls, and make those of value to you. So I'm going to talk about 3 key areas today. What are the basic building blocks of voice security? How do you implement that? What are the kind of the order of magnitude items? Look at some of the threats that our customers and prospects are facing today. We talked about a few of those in the introduction conversation, and then go through those, jump right in, get to the key message, the keynote, talk about use cases in our largest banks, finance, and retail customers. So just a quick level set slide to say what we're trying to accomplish. You know, the big goal is really stop hindering communication between businesses and customers. Get rid of these threats that impact that core commerce communication that is needed to help get business going flowing and smoothly. So enterprise businesses make legitimate calls to their customers. Customers call in to enterprise businesses, but bad actors are trying to short circuit that process. These are threats that we see in numerous vertical markets and industries. Obviously, robocalls, we've talked quite a bit about, social engineering, fraud, malicious attacks. Those are all things that impact enterprises on an inbound basis as bad actors try to take advantage of lack of security or lack of controls so they can get access to key and valuable information.
Phil, sorry to interrupt you, but your presentation is not on play mode. Do you want to change it, or is it okay as the way it is?
Is it displaying okay, Elena?
No, it's not on playing mode. It's just I mean, we can see the thumbnails on the left. So
Okay.
is it okay for you?
Yeah.
Just a technical mistake. So do you want to share your screen again?
Yes. Let me do that.
Thank you. Les recordamos que todas las preguntas que quieran hacerle a Phil las podemos resolver. Si las quieren mandar en inglés o en español, las vamos a poner aquí. So you want to put play mode on the presentation?
Okay.
This is small button down. No.
Sorry about that. So I'll share.
Yes.
Sure. So I'm sharing the window. Is that better?
Yes. Yes, that's great. Okay. Thank you so much. Sorry.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for correcting that.
Thank you.
So we're all about to elevate this communication, allow it to go through and get rid of these threats that disrupt normal enterprise to customer commerce. So let's look at the data structure and security around a data network versus a voice network. So we're very familiar with data security. It's very controlled, very locked down, very restrictive. You've got to have credentials to get access to the network, to the limited few that need to get access. So we're eliminating all other attempts to access that network. In this day of ransomware, obviously data security has even gotten more serious and controlled. So very important to keep tight controls on that data network security. But we find on a voice network that it's completely the opposite. A voice network isn't designed with any level of security. It's really set up to allow calls to be connected fast and efficiently. So you can pick up a phone anywhere in the world, call into your bank or your organization, and that call will be connected very timely, very quickly. So no checks about who's calling, what their intent is, what their past history is of doing types of voice threats and attacks. So there's really no security around that voice network. But we find that the same threats that exist in the data network also hit the voice network. There's malicious attacks and unauthorized access, much like a data denial service. The TDOS is a telephony denial service. A flood of calls in to consume the available bandwidth into your organization and stop legitimate customer calls and traffic. And I've got some specific examples of that. Robocalls, we talked about, is the big item. Obviously, spam and email is more on the data side. There's some hidden attacks that you typically wouldn't find with normal PBX or contact center tools, such as call pumping, where people are trying to route as many calls as they can into your network, loiter in the queue, loiter in the IVR, not connect to an agent. They want to say that keep that call connected as long as they can because they share in that revenue stream that flows back through the carrier network. Then social engineering obviously exists in the data network, also very prolific on the voice network as people try to take advantage of the human nature that you want to help and assist somebody, and people take advantage of that in getting in touch with contact center agents. So the threats do exist in the voice network. To create a solution for that, the basic building blocks is to create the same technologies used in the data network. So we have a call firewall, looks on a call-by-call basis, a call intrusion prevention system, looking at patterns of calls, looks at all the calls at one time to see if there's unique patterns or signatures. And then you'll see today the value of our red list. This is a list of enterprise class robocall spam numbers that we use and share with other managed service customers to really get that traffic off their environments. And you'll just see the tremendous impact that list has had with some of our biggest customers. Then we wrap that into a reporting and forensics analysis package so you can get views in your traffic that you probably haven't seen before. And I'll give a specific example of a banking fraud environment where the analytics we have really uncovered and detected a fraud that the bank was not aware of. So data networks very secure, voice networks by nature unsecure, but we've got the ability to put that security in place to create a voice defense for your environment. Just quickly, we took a look at all our customers over the last year, 200 managed service customers across various vertical markets and industries, just to look at some statistics in terms of what attacks and what the trending is going to be. So we're 30 million different threatening calls blocked per year across those 200 customers. You'll see that that's about 150 on average, but you'll find that that's really skewed. Some of our largest customers, we block millions of calls from their environments. So it's not a level average playing field. But of all the statistics, the one that's really important is the bottom left, the 5% of traffic is really threatening. When I first started 11 years ago, we measured that with the data we got from our customers, like we did here, typically 1 to 2%. So that's grown over the last 10 years to over 5%. And I've got a number of customers that we work with today that flag about 10% of their traffic needing further analysis and validation. So not saying it's 10% of it's threatening, but there's some suspect there, something wrong with the processor signatures that needs further inspection before it's routed to an agent or an IVR to interact with the banking or retail system. So just a good checkpoint. We'll do this study again next year and we'll see what the year-over-year numbers look like. So let's jump into banking and finance. Some use cases, got a couple of those for you. Just real quick, I know Oscar put some numbers up from the Communications Fraud Control Association. I wanted to look at specifically fraud in US banks in 2019 by payment type. This is published by Statista this year. So these numbers all add up to over $1 billion. So US banks lose over $1 billion in terms of different fraud through various payment processes. And if you looked at the first 6, most of these would involve a phone call, obviously a wire transfer. They absolutely insist that before you put the routing number information in to do a wire transfer, that you contact the lending institution or escrow office to say, is this indeed the information I need to legitimately do this wire transfer? And you can see why with this amount of fraud that goes on with wire transfers. But think about it. In Oscar's presentation this morning, he talked about when is the call from your bank, not from your bank. So if you're going to call into your bank to do that wire transfer, are you really calling the right place? Or did they call you impersonating themselves? Because the fraudsters know that phone call is a key part of getting that transfer to get initiated. So, but phone calls really touch most of these processes, and thought that was pretty important to understand how that $1 billion gets stolen every year. So first we'll look at a TDOS event. This one's truly amazing. It's just talk about good luck, good timing. So we had a top 50 bank evaluate our system and deploy it. They had already centralized their headquarters, contact center, and over 450 branches in a centralized IP-based model called SIP trunking in their 2 data centers. So it's easy to deploy our system in that centralized location in the primary and backup data center to protect their whole network. So we had it fully deployed. About 6 months into having that, they started to get inklings of a flood of calls coming into their system. So we got alerted, the customer got alerted. We noticed that all the numbers they're using were part of our red list. And that was that fraud list of numbers that we manage and share with customers. So the system automatically identified those numbers and started terminating those. Well, they cranked up the automated dialing of this TDOS event and launched it up to 15,000 calls an hour. So tremendous call per second rate that they had capacity to do. And you can see over 2 days, in a 24-hour period, just hitting up to 300 and at the end up to 400,000 calls over a 24-hour period. So tremendous capacity they had. This was a very sophisticated attack. But even as they added new numbers, those numbers were also part of our fraud database. So the system would catch those numbers, also block those and terminate that. So we closely worked with the customer, made sure those numbers weren't aging, meaning they were once fraud, but maybe got reassigned by a carrier to a new user, but they all proved out to be still part of the fraud process. So we blocked over 7 million calls over that two and a half day period. So just amazing timing, great proof point of our solution. And we've got the data from the system. All the records are stored in a relational database. So we had all the records to show and do this analysis of the impact it could have had on a bank. So that's a good question to ask is, what if your bank didn't have a solution like this? How would that have impacted your ability to do your transactions or get in touch with your bank? Conversely, if you worked at that bank and it didn't have this solution, how would you have dealt with that, recovered, or actually tried to stop this attack? Because something a carrier can't initially do in a quick and timely fashion, just due to the challenges that the carrier networks provide. So, great example of our solution in action, and some of the key capabilities we have to identify the right numbers and terminate those calls. So that's our core capability, to use whitelist and redlist to block numbers and filter numbers out. But here's a more sophisticated example of using the analytics capability to find really a needle in a haystack. So this is a top 5 bank. We process over 11 million calls a week for them. So it was 11 million calls per week. And you can see from this reports that we found some numbers that were very suspicious. So we work closely with the bank's fraud team, the GIS group, and we share with them numbers that we find suspicious patterns on. So this is an example of 2 numbers. Typically every week we sit and review with them a dozen to a few dozen numbers every week that we find suspicious. And they look those up to see what happened on the data side. They did a complete picture of the fraud that occurred. So in this case, the 2 numbers, you can see the inbound numbers for SIP. At Securelogix, we sit at the edge of the network, so we see all the traffic. So there were 347 calls inbound. Of those, 337 got routed to the IVR, so 10 dropped off. Once in the IVR, this is really crazy. Out of the 337 calls from that number, 25 authenticated with valid accounts, meaning they had the user and ID number and the password to get access to the account and use the IVR to transfer money or do transactions. So very suspicious. I don't know about you. I don't have 25 accounts at any one bank. And to make that many calls in regarding the same accounts, obviously this is fraud activity. So this was new news to the bank. They weren't aware of these accounts being attacked and successful fraud activity. So they went on the IVR side, validated that yes, the accounts were accessed and money was transferred out of those accounts. So they flagged those accounts, obviously. But on the voice side, we don't want to just terminate those calls. We can easily do that. We want to redirect those calls now to a fraud-based agent team that especially deals with these types of issues. So they look, feel, and sound just like a very eager agent to help you, but they're actually highly trained security and fraud teams that are going to try to social engineer some conversations with the fraudsters, find out where they got the information, what other information they may have, so the bank can use that information to create a new security policy and help secure those environments. So very interesting case. Second number, same thing, out of 270 calls, 25 accounts authenticated, and they access 21 accounts to actually make transactions. So flagging those calls really makes it helpful for them. And we do this every week. So over a year period, we've tracked and identified a key number of numbers that are fraud. And we're finding this is 600 numbers out of 11 million in a week. So very good analytics that we have in our managed services team to identify this year volume of calls, the time of day they call, the sequence they call in, they call on at once, they scatter over a period of time to help hide their activity. So all those are things that we can catch and bring this to the attention of the bank. So similar type attack. This is obviously a more automated dial. You can see this, the middle dial from California, over 12,000 So this is an automated call trying to get in the IVR, have it run through scripts to try to guess passwords and numbers. You can see in all three of these cases, they were unsuccessful in all attempts. So this is really them trying to guess passwords. They don't have any good information. They don't have last names, addresses, or some key information to make more of an intelligent guess on passwords. So these aren't that valuable for the fraud team to try to converse with. So these are really just non-business related calls that are taking up time in the call center and the IVR. So we just go ahead and bank says, yeah, just go ahead and terminate these, get these out of our system. So, but same thing with these automated systems, some weeks much higher than 12,000 calls from the same numbers trying to access these accounts. So we just remove this traffic and clean up the IVR and the call center queues. But both are good examples of using that analytics database, relational database, to find these patterns through the IPS capability to identify that signature and say, hey, this is suspicious. This is something the bank needs to take a look at. And working at them with them cooperatively, us looking at the voice side, them looking at the data side, it's quick and easy to create a picture and remove this fraud from their environment. Then lastly, here's another example of what TDOS, traffic denial of service attack, on a bank that did not have our system. So they got attacked for a series of calls, started and lasted about 3 hours the first time. So it consumed all the bandwidth into the main office and a couple of the branches. The branch manager was getting tired of the phone call saying, hey, pay us this ransom, we'll stop the calls. He got a little frustrated and threatened to get him arrested and send the police in. So that upset the perpetrators of the TDOS event. They doubled the calls into the main call center and started reaching out to branch locations that are nearby in the same city. So they started expanding the attack. So after 24 hours of this disruption and the threatening extortion calls to pay the ransom, they reached out to us, and we did an emergency deployment. Since they had IP-based, SIP-based trunking, made it fairly easy for us to get the right components in place. What's most important is, since we have a number of large banking and financial customers, we had a best practice policy of rules for enforcing security policy for that banking and finance industry. So that was our core. We had a good base to start with. Probably 80% of the events we could load from that best practice rule and policy, set up the TDOS defense system, and was able to stop the attack and block all those numbers. So it was that knowledge and expertise of our managed services team, plus that years of experience in the best practice rules and policies, that made it very effective and efficient to load this and not make it a complex installation process. So after some time of blocking those attacks, they changed numbers. We follow suit, capture those numbers through an automated system that can detect those numbers and also block those once we identify them as part of the attack. And then the attacker went away. So it's still deployed in the customer. They're getting a lot of value out of the system, but just a good explanation of what it's like to have a bank or branch without a defense system, either ours or our competitors, really the ability to control those calls. So they really were at the mercy of this fraudster who's just consuming the bandwidth into their banking and branch environment. So to try to summarize the banking environment, obviously there's an absolute requirement for voice security. You need some device, some capability to have that visibility into what's going on in your center and how to stop it, redirect, or control those calls. So we gave some good examples of the fraud that occurs in TDOS events that occur in the banking environments, and it's critical to have that security. Obviously, you want to leverage existing best practices, rules, and policies from a company that has the experience, has the existing policies and rules in place, especially for your specific vertical market that you're doing business in. And then obviously critical to use a qualified partner. ASLO is our exclusive partner for Latin America. They have full access to our engineers and technical teams to leverage our experience and knowledge, and they've done a fantastic job so far. So we're very pleased to continue working with them. But that's critical to have a knowledgeable, experienced partner to help deploy systems quickly and easily. So I'm going to transition to talk about the retail environment. It's got a pretty different look and feel. But Elena, any questions we want to address at this point?
Do you have any questions, Oscar?
Phil.
Yes,
hello,
Oscar.
everyone. Oscar Lascano again. I wanted to join Phil on this call because I believe the understanding where the success reside on banking, it's very important for our countries, Mexico in particular. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, Phil, is since you have seen directly how some of the biggest banks obtain benefits and return on the investment in voice security, do you find any reason why a bank should not be protecting their voice assets today? I mean, is there any good reason why a bank should say, no, we don't want to do it?
Gosh, Oscar, I really can't think of any because our banks get so much benefit out of it. Even if they don't feel comfortable terminating calls, just having the visibility, alerting their fraud teams, sharing this valuable information to them in real time. We can send out real-time alerts at these calls that are on their fraud watch list. So a lot of the customers give us, their fraud team gives us a list saying, hey, here's the numbers that we're watching that you don't know about, but put them in a list. And if the call comes in, alert us, let us know those are in queue. So we can let them know in real time that those calls are in queue. They can find out what agent's going to handle that call, and they can monitor the screen information to get information. So without even having to redirect or terminate calls, just that simple ability to alert, let the fraud team know what's going on, it's very valuable. Because I've talked to a number of risk loss directors at banks, and they said, hey, it's hard to tell if fraud really initiated in the contact center. We don't have a good anchor to say, did that start elsewhere and just flow into the contact center? But now we can give them that hard statistic data showing, hey, this pattern of calls, this signature shows us that this is something that somebody's trying to utilize the contact center agents to perpetrate some fraud. So I think even without the call control aspect, just the awareness, learning capabilities is a valuable tool for most financial institutions and banks.
Correct. Now, the financial sector has all sizes and kinds of institutions, from the biggest banks, the smaller investment firms, some banks that are catering to the lowest income population. And of course, we have the central banks, the bank that is not necessarily a super huge network of branches, but at the end of the day, they run the monetary policy in the countries. In the United States, we have the Fed. In Mexico, we have our own central bank. And so every other country who participates on the international banking system, they do have a bank. So from your perspective, Phil, why a central bank should be concerned about protecting the voice network?
Well, I think it's very important because obviously banks are where the money is, right? That's the old joke. But a central bank really controls policy for all the flows down through all the financial institutions, from mortgages to banking to loans to commercial loans. So they're the critical linchpin that needs to be protected, because even though they're not doing high volumes of transactions like a regular retail bank would be, their influence in the banking world is so critical, because maybe they get a TDOS event or hacked via the phone system that leaks important information. So it may not be a theft of financial value, but that one of information or disruption that would flow through the financial network very quickly.
Absolutely. One of the things that central banks do is they oversee and control all the transactions happening between all the banks in the region. So if you have an account in, let's say, Wells Fargo, and I have an account in what other bank? Citibank. Yeah. And if I want to transfer you money, the central bank, at least in Mexico, this is the way it works, they are controlling that transaction so that If you need to file a complaint because for some reason the money is not showing up on your account,
Right.
They give me enough information to say what happened to that bank. So, in central banks, I wanted to say before I let you continue with the retail case, which is also very important, and I will appreciate it at the end of the retail case, we can exchange a couple of comments. I do believe that central banks, in one hand, should be protecting their assets, just thinking that they are another company with a lot of people performing very critical functions.
Yeah, mission
and
critical
the other
function.
hand, exactly. And on the other hand, protecting their infrastructure, while the telephony network in the central bank is not necessarily the core business, using the telephony voice network as an access method to more critical assets maybe represent a very, very big problem. So I believe that central banks and any bank, of course, any banking institution necessarily should be thinking about extending the protection to all these assets that for one reason or another are currently being left out from some of the most critical consideration from protecting assets. So, Phil, I will let you continue.
Just one comment on that.
Sure.
Just a quick comment on that, Oscar. I was thinking, came to mind as a need to protect the central bank assets really through social engineering. What if I social engineer the number of calls into that central bank, find out some key information about interest rates or discount rates that's not public? That can be extremely detrimental. So I'm using the voice network to get the access to that information because there's no protection on that. I can get to the people I need to get to, have that conversation and persuade them to release non-public information.
I think that's very important. Central banks have almost a red telephone line with the most important authorities in government. In certain situations in the real world, central banks need to make some dramatic moves to maintain the economy in stable levels. I believe protecting the information in any possible way, shape, or form is something that especially central banks should be doing. So I'll let you continue with the retail case, Phil, and then I'll come back for final comments.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Oscar.
Thank you.
So we're going to jump through a few retail use cases. Got a couple of key examples for you. So this is a pretty astonishing level of calls. So Jim Colton talked about the robocall issue and just the sheer number of calls and how the store shaking is going to help stop that. But this is what we're doing today with our customers. This is a very large retail outfit. Most of the calls are answered in a contact center, as they do a lot of phone and inside sales. There's thousands of numbers of retail outlets, very small, but they're just numerous throughout the country. So you can see from the Q1 of 2019 through Q1 of 2020, just the trend line. These are the red lists. These are the spam, robocalls, fraud calls, harassing calls that are part of that list that we vet out, keep current, and share with all our managed service customers. So you can see the trend line is just increasing in terms of the sheer amount of calls. So for this organization, we averaged just under 200,000 calls a month that we terminate. And for the year, we did 2.25 million calls. So we thought that was pretty astonishing. We knew as COVID ramped up in 2020, that we're probably going to see that trend line continue. But we were a little astonished when we saw this year's numbers running. So we did an update, the same company, same list. So from January through August of this year, we've terminated over 5.2 million calls. Just a huge jump, 100% increase in the amount of calls that met our profile that needed to get removed from this environment. So once again, you asked that question, what if I worked in this environment, they didn't have this system, and these 5.2 million calls, hounded my office, my contact center, day in, day out, because these are sure automated robocalls that make a majority of these calls. So just tremendous amount of calls. Unfortunately, we think with COVID still lingering, the amount of scams and robocalls and people willing to do this type of scams is just going to continue. But you can see the large variation of calls. One week, 1 month out of the quarter, over 100,000 calls, where just a few weeks prior, we're barely hitting 20. So it can be very variable in terms of its capacity, but just the sheer impact this has on the agents, the network, and the trunking is truly phenomenal. And then similar for another retail customer, they seem to be really heavily impacted with these types of calls. Terminated 1.7 million calls in 2020. First part of this 2021 jumped up just 1 million calls just in those 2 months alone. Huge spike in January. We're not sure what to explain that because it really wasn't quite any significant events with COVID, but a huge spike that affected them. And then as we ran it through the first 7 months of the year, it jumped to 4 million calls. It just, I went back to the account team and said, log into the system, show me this relational database that we manage for this customer and show me the records. And it's truly right out of a relational database using Splunk to extract the data and create a report. And it's truly valid calls and just astonishing the amount of traffic. So that was over a 300% increase in these type of calls. So outside of the social engineering, the telephony denial of service attacks, the more sophisticated, more serious attacks, these pure robocalls, fraud calls, and spam calls, telemarketing calls are just still prolific. And we hope that Jim's vision comes true and we get Stir Shaken turned on here to help be another tool in our toolbox to help block and eliminate this type of traffic. So I wanted to highlight those. Those are two big things that we've seen this year with our retail customers. But let's look at some of the more day-to-day stuff that we find with some of the big box retailers. So one big box retailer has an issue, still does, little stronger last year with people calling them bomb threats. And it doesn't sound like a major thing, but you think the size of a big box store for a retailer, just the sheer amount of cost it takes to process through a bomb threat. So they shared with us they expect it costs about $12,000 per event. In talking with some other people, we think that's probably a political answer. We think it's much more than that. So if you think about it, and you can Google it, your favorite name of your big box store and bomb threat, you'll find reports in newspapers all through the country about stores being closed. But the typical process is they have the bomb threat alert comes in. They've got to close the store, get all the people out of the store, get non-essential employees out of the store, take all the money out of the registers and cash, put all that back in the vault, wait for the police to arrive, police assess the situation, and typically also call the fire department out. So they have to arrive in case there's an incident. And then they need to wait for the bomb threat team to come out with the bomb specific tools. So they have to arrive and come to the store. And then concurrent with them, or lastly, the bomb sniffing dog stuff to be a part of that team. So it takes a lot of assets and resources from the first responders. It takes time to get them there and assess the situation. They've got to walk the entire store. So you're talking hundreds of thousands of square feet. And then once that's clear, they have to reverse the whole process, take the money out. All the food that's in the carts has to be thrown away because it's no longer, it's been unrefrigerated. Get all the carts restored back in status. So once the police officers clear the store, it takes them about another full hour to get the store ready for opening. So you've already paid salaries for the day. You got to decide if you're going to send people home or bring in third shift people. So it's definitely a major impact to their environment. But by adding a recording capability to our existing system, we were able to, one, capture the bomb threat calls for the police and for the store managers. Second, a couple times they were able to identify a voice on the call, somebody that worked at the company. So they went and interviewed him and found out if that was truly him and why he or she may have done that. Obviously, it was an inability to come to work that day issue. But so it's really helped them knock down the sheer number of bomb threats they get and their ability to more quickly stop and deal with those. When I did look through some of the Google postings on that, it sounds like a lot of times they get bomb threats. They hit 3 or 4 stores in the same city, same area. So obviously it's more detrimental to a city or county if they hit more than one store in that environment. So related to that, these big box retailers sell a lot of gift cards and debit cards. So they were calling in, fraudsters trying to say, hey, I don't have to physically do anything. I can threaten them, get them to tell me over the phone the new debit card number from Visa or from the other suppliers, and get money that way. So it's also helped deal with those, let them know those calls are recorded, and we've got some evidence to share with the authorities and the loss prevention teams.
Phil,
Obviously,
just a
yeah.
brief question. Do you detected some kind of fraud related with some support of the government, some money from the government in order to support the people who lost their job or needed some food or something? Did you detected something in that during that monitoring and during the year?
Not specific to some of the government payments, any type of fraud. I know there was a number of issues with some fraud teams that were using those payments, but unfortunately, I'm not aware of anything we've identified as part of that fraud process that went on with the government payouts and using those that trying to cash those out or using them improperly at stores.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So in addition to the other accounts that have the huge amount of robocalls, we make custom lists for the big box retailers because they get a number of calls from bill collectors. I mean, huge amounts of calls from bill collectors trying to find employees. Some of these stores have 2 million, over 3 million employees. So it's a good place to find somebody to say, hey, you skipped out on your loan payment, you skipped out on your rent. We're going to come track you down. So getting those numbers, identifying them, getting them into a block list has been very helpful for the stores, as well as headhunters trying to hire away senior managers and in-need people, especially in this day and time where it's hard to find employees. We can block those headhunters, and then disgruntled employees who are calling in trying to harass their old peers or their bosses. We can easily block those numbers and just get that distraction out of the stores. One area that you wouldn't think of in terms of voice security can help with, since we have that relational database, working with the different store managers and different department heads, we were talking about the inbound phone operations. In most stores, the phones are entered in the fitting rooms. They have a lot of ebbs and flow of time, so they can answer the phone as well as unlock and help customers in trying on clothes in the fitting rooms. But we shared the reports to them in terms of the call volumes and the ebb and flow throughout the day, and it really didn't match up with that department head's staffing of that group. So we identified that he was overstaffed at 2 key points of the day. He could reassign those headcount and didn't need them there because they had enough employees to deal with the fitting room responsibilities, but there wasn't the demand for the phone calls as they once thought. So saving a FTE or FTD and a half doesn't sound like much, but you multiply that times over 5,000 stores, and now you're talking some pretty serious money to do that. So we're also able to help with the pharmacy. Obviously, there's huge spikes in inbound pharmacy calls. If there's more than a set number of calls in queue, we can send out a real-time alert to different operations managers that work in the back office saying, hey, the pharmacy needs help. We need to get some qualified people to help answer calls and process the people who are standing in line to check out. So just a non-security way, but the relational database can really help you put some metrics in place for the customer to help them with some of their day-to-day business processes. So the retail summary: robocall, spam, harassing calls, and telemarketing calls are really impacting retail operations. We saw that at 2 major retailers, some of the largest ones in the world, are struggling with that, but we can help block down and get rid of those calls. So one thing I didn't talk about, there's some basic block and tackling we can do with that reporting, restricting long distance calls, calls overseas, international calls, stuff that you do typically through various PBXs. We can do that on a global basis, put one set of rules and policies in for all the stores, push it out to all the store locations, and it's uniform in terms of how they're allowing, blocking, and reporting on calls that are made way into the night or long distance calls. So sounds pretty rudimentary, but with the sheer amount of stores these companies have, saving 10 or 20 calls a store can add up to some pretty big savings. So you can get that voice security real-time ROI with operational savings as well as network savings. And then having a partner experience with deploying voice security, critical. Obviously, Oslo can leverage us in terms of our experience with working with these retailers, bring that expertise and knowledge into the Latin American market. So that concludes my retail section. So if you want to go to some questions, Elena or Oscar, we're glad to do that.
Yes, I don't know if you talk about the fines. I mean, we've heard probably at the beginning of the year that some robocaller received a fine from $10 million. But
Yes.
how these fines are working and how they are being like regulated or how they're being applied?
I'm not an expert in the area, but typically we find when the FCC or the FTC finds these companies, takes them to court, the problem is these organizations don't have a lot of authority to enforce the fine payments. So it goes to the FTC. They work with Treasury to say, hey, this money's owed. But what we find is once the court or judge awards, a $10 million penalty for this robocaller, does that money actually get paid down the road? And that enforcement process, once the judgment's been made, is where I hear that there's some issue. So a lot of times they don't pay those amounts, so they pay much littler amount, or they continue to fight it in the court system and don't actually have to make hard dollar payments. So I have to do a little more research in that area, but that's the big challenge with the fines is they make good headlines and good splash. But I'm not sure I've heard that actually that cash is flowing back to the Treasury.
Okay, we have 2 questions here. And
good.
say, Phil, how much of the total of the IT budget should be allocated for telephony security? Would you have a ballpark amount?
Well, obviously, it depends on the size of the organization. So for banks, we have single site credit unions and small branches of private financial companies to obviously the largest banks in the world. So I think it definitely needs to be a part of the budget based on all the reasons we gave here today. Obviously, in the small end, it's going to be a much bigger percentage. I can probably follow up with that and give you some more real life statistical numbers, but I see so much variability between a large company and a small company. But I think it should be 5 to 10% of your budget should be allocated to voice security because it's one of your 2 primary ways you communicate with your customers and clients, and it's critical to have that open, available, and secure to have that communication.
Okay. I have another question. Are these systems being used during the elections? I mean, is probably, I don't know if it's very new, but do you have any case that have been affecting elections or voters?
Yes, we had a county in Florida that was extremely concerned in the last 2020 elections with all the turmoil that was going on that they were going to get impacted. The concern was since the voting booths at the various schools and churches and throughout the community call back to the centralized voter registrar office that day of the election if they have problems with machines or need technical assistance or policy decisions, that if somebody blocked that communication, it would definitely impact the election and people's ability to vote. So they actually purchased our system fairly quickly before the 2020 elections and deployed it simply to have the ability so nobody could block or interfere with the call center operations to support such a large county in Florida. So I think we had 2 or 3 counties purchase systems before the election for that same reason, the concern with some of the political turmoil that people were going to try to disrupt those operations.
Yeah, that's the way they think they influence on the voters.
Yeah.
We have another question. Phil, thank you so much for your presentation. My question is, in the banking industry, which are the internal departments that are decision makers when adopting these technologies besides IT?
That's a good question. So large banks, it takes a village. I mean, there's so many people that have checks and balances. So obviously IT is the core. I'd say the key one you really need to work closely with is the global information systems or the fraud teams. They're critical to understanding the value of that. So the fraud loss team, the risk loss, much more legal, regulatory concerns. So you need to have regulatory, risk loss, fraud teams, call center, communications, and the data network and data network security all on board. So there's probably 7 key groups there that need to at least be on board in the process and participate in really not so much the physical deployment. That's pretty straightforward. It's the policies. If we get these type of calls, what do we want to do with them? Do we want to block them, restrict them, alert on them, redirect them? So it's those policies that need the business rules that are important to have everybody's concurrence and buy-in.
Okay. Elias Salas has another question. What would you say is the strongest business case for a bank or a retailer that truly convince them to protect their voice assets?
I think for the banking, it's really controlling fraud in the contact center. It's an area that people dabble in. They try to program some block lists in the call center systems, the Cisco, the Genesis, the Avias, but it runs out of runway fairly quickly. And it doesn't have the signature files and the intelligence to look at those patterns of calls and suspect calls that those systems weren't designed to see or deal with. So controlling fraud in the call center with banking, retail. I think there's so many small use cases. I think the overall network management of calls, having that centralized platform to see all the connections, all the call volumes, and really give you solid numbers to know how well you should be trunked for each branch office. If you have a lot of stores, how to manage those and how to control calls in and out of those environments. So it's that visibility across your whole network that makes it so powerful. So we've got 5 or 6 key retailers, a couple of big box retailers. They all see value in that single view of their networks and being able to control that. And then secondary, removing the robocalls, telemarketing calls, because obviously those are valuable to get rid of, but it's a little more challenging to create a hard dollar ROI about, hey, I'm going to spend this money to get rid of these robocalls. But the first one I described is definitely something that makes hard dollar values and ROIs make sense.
Okay, Jose Maria Gomez de la Torre has another question. Hi, Phil. What's the success rate then deploying a solution in a retail operation? How many calls out of the total can be the retailer effectively blocked?
Good question. So we see overall from our statistical analysis across all verticals, about 5% of the calls need further treatment. So I'd say ones you could absolutely block is probably in the 2 to 3% range. Those other ones probably need further analysis or authentication. There's something amiss with the signature files or the setup of those. So overall, it's 5%, but outright blocking probably in the 2 to 3% range.
Great. Okay, let's bring Oscar for the final conclusions. Estás muteado. Yeah.
The most common phrase this year, Phil, or the last 2 years, I'm in mute. I'm sorry. Phil, thank you very much for preparing this presentation for us. I think
my pleasure. Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you. I think the information that you have presented is really eye-opening for not only the decision makers within the banking and the retail industry, but also for those companies such as Aslo, who is, on a daily basis talking to people, preaching about the benefits of protecting the voice assets, the telephony networks, whether they are on premise or on the cloud, or they are going through a digital transformation, or they decide to stay traditional. It really doesn't matter. The moment that you have a phone ringing, that's where the risk may kick in. And as we have demonstrated through this journey, starting at 9 o'clock this morning until now, 4 o'clock, we have shared different angles of the same problem, and all the opinions converge in one single item, which is it pays to protect the telephony assets. It helps the customers, helps the administrators. I've seen IT administrators trying to find words to explain why they owe $15,000 from Friday to Monday because they forgot doing something as simple as issuing a command in a Cisco gateway, for instance. So not only the customers become benefited from this, IT administrators, managers, the stakeholders, the most important stakeholders, at the end of the day, can't feel good things about adopting technology. So thank you for trusting in Oslo and for trusting in the Telephony Security Week, because I think we are touching a lot of people and we're helping them with good information. So Alina, I think that's it. Thank you very much for walking through this journey with us this morning. And
let's share the information, the contact information of Phil, where they can contact you if they got any doubts, if they want to do business with you.
Great. Well, definitely, I don't have that in the slide over here. I'll get that to Oscar and he can post that for you.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Will you share your LinkedIn with us, how they can contact you?
Yes. You can reach Oscar, can reach me anytime, or I'll share my LinkedIn. Give me a minute.
I think we have it on screen, Phil, for you. So no worries.
Oh, good. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we'll got your LinkedIn.
Follow Securelogix on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and enter securelogix.com. And it was a pleasure to have you here, Phil. Thank you so much
for having me.
It was
very enjoyable. Thank you, Alina. Appreciate it.
A todos, pues nos vemos mañana en punto de las 9 de la mañana para seguir con estas presentaciones. Vamos a empezar en grande con un caso bastante interesante desde Argentina. Oscar, ¿nos quieres decir algo al respecto?
Gracias, Alina. Mañana a las 9 tenemos un panel de discusión México-Argentina, que si fuera partido de fútbol no estaría tan bueno como va a estar el panel de mañana. No tan solo por el tema que es de interés a todos, sino porque las personas que nos hacen el favor de acompañarnos y de regalarnos hora y media de su tiempo son autoridades en sus áreas, tanto en el sector de protección de datos personales como en la operación legal de un banco. Y lo que vamos a hablar es medidas cautelares que se emitieron a favor de un usuario que resultó afectado por una estafa telefónica. Algo a lo que, como ya hemos podido ver en las estadísticas, miles de personas aspiran a que la ley les diga: no fue tu culpa, fue culpa de alguien más y te vamos a pagar. 31,000 personas están esperando esa decisión en México y lo lograron en Argentina. Y mañana es el caso que se va a discutir. Invitamos a todas las personas del área legal, de Contraloría, de gestión de fraude, a que nos acompañen para escuchar los detalles finos del caso, y que esperamos que la información que se va a compartir les sea de utilidad para, pues, delinear sus estrategias alrededor de la nueva información que se está generando. Nos vemos mañana a 9 de la mañana. Muchísimas gracias a todos por su atención.
Gracias a todos. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego. Thank you, Phil. Goodbye.
Right, bye-bye, Oscar. Bye.
The public switch telephone network, as we know it, is almost in danger because so few people have confidence in it anymore. A lot of people don't answer the phone at all anymore if they don't know exactly who it is, and that's a serious thing. Companies with large contact centers are very concerned about it because people won't take their calls anymore. So I think restoring all of this trust is important both for consumers and businesses, and Securelogix is doing a lot to try to restore that trust.
Our customer base runs the gamut from some of the largest financial institutions on the planet, some of the largest military and defense organizations, right down to a single law firm that is dealing with a robocall issue at a kind of a small business level. We have customers across that base.
We are a smallish, dedicated team who are very focused on our customer and very eager to help them solve their problems. We're not a big, nameless, faceless shop. We're a dedicated group of people who work very hard together and really provide, I think, almost custom services and products and solutions to our customers.
One of our key capabilities is through a managed service. So we have a managed security services for voice, or MSSP. And the idea there is we captured this 20 years of expertise into a managed service team. So we deploy our solution, we provide our solution in whatever form the customer needs, whether it's a mid-sized bank up to a big bank, military, etc. And then our team runs the solution for the customers.
We've been doing voice security for 20 years. No one else in the industry has done that. We were doing it long before there was a lot of voice over IP in the marketplace, and we understood the problem, we addressed it in a TDM world, and then we transitioned it to the SIP world. We're able to identify what's happening out in the industry because we do have our solution deployed in some of the biggest networks across the world, both government and commercial. And we're seeing in real time these issues, and then we can develop countermeasures and get those implemented.
And we have continued to evolve now into what I consider the full spectrum of threats associated with the voice service as a whole, which now includes this, what I see as kind of a final big piece associated with call verification and authentication. At the end of the day, you cannot separate voice security from authentication. It is a spectrum of activity that needs to be addressed as a unified whole with a solution set that what we provide, we think, is truly unique in the market.
Ok, están realizando una compra con cargo a su tarjeta débito. ¿Usted está realizando esta compra, señor?
Cuando recibes una llamada y dicen que son de tu banco, pero te piden algún dato como tu contraseña o NIP, ojo, puede tratarse de un delincuente. Más de 1.900.000 fraudes se realizaron tan solo en el primer trimestre del 2021. 13.560 casos de robo de identidad en ese mismo periodo. De 4.6 millones de extorsiones denunciadas, 88.9% de ellas fueron a través de extorsiones telefónicas. No te pierdas la Semana de la Seguridad Telefónica presentada por ASLO Information Technologies, 19 y 20 de octubre. Acceso libre a las pláticas con expertos y expertas en los sectores legal, tecnológico, de negocios y humano. Dale like y conéctate a cada charla en facebook.com/ASLO Infotech. Te esperamos.